Dust curled like smoke beneath the noon sun, swallowing the wooden fences and rust-bitten rails of the Bitter Creek stockyard. The smell of sweat, old hay, and fear hung thick in the air. Buyers leaned against fence posts and wagons, tipping their hats and grinning like it was just another livestock sale. Only it wasn't cattle being auctioned today. It was children. Sheriff Vance Murdoch stood on a crude wooden platform, wearing a tan vest that gleamed too clean for a man of his morals. His thick jowls quivered as he barked orders. Behind him, 2 deputies wrangled a group of dirt-streaked kids, some too stunned to cry, some too used to it to stop. The pen stank of urine, dust, and something far worse: despair. At the edge of the enclosure, a girl no older than 5 clutched a battered rag doll to her chest. Blonde curls matted with sweat and sand clung to her forehead. Her cheeks were streaked with dried tears and blood. The doll's button eyes were mismatched, one hanging by a thread, but the way the child held it, tight and fierce, told anyone with a heart that it was all she had left. Murdoch cleared his throat. "Lot 12, yes," he announced. "Blonde. Quiet. Perfect condition. She's trained to obey and doesn't speak unless asked. Gentlemen, don't be shy. We start the bidding at $100. 2 suited men leaned forward, adjusting their gloves like they were inspecting a prize mare. One of them pulled out a gold watch and tapped it. Another scribbled in a small black book. The child backed away, pressing herself to the fence. A deputy stepped forward. He grabbed her arm, and that's when the ground itself seemed to shudder. "Don't touch her!" The voice came low and hard, like thunder cracking dry earth. Every man in the yard froze. From the far side of the stockyard, a towering figure pushed through the gate, his boots pounding the dry ground in a slow, deliberate rhythm. He stood at least 6'4", shoulders broad enough to block the sun. A worn leather vest hugged his frame, and his brown cowboy hat was pulled low over eyes the color of a frozen lake. The dusty wind whipped his duster behind him like a storm front rolling in. He moved with the calm of a man who didn't need to rush to be deadly. "Step away from her," he growled again. The deputy hesitated, his grip tightening on the girl's tiny arm. The cowboy didn't warn him a third time. He reached the platform in 3 strides, grabbed the man by the collar, and threw him from the steps like he weighed nothing. The crowd gasped as the deputy hit the dirt, unconscious before he even landed. Sheriff Murdoch raised a hand, half in protest, half in alarm. "Now, Mac, there's no need to cause a scene." But Tobias McClum folks called him. Mac wasn't listening. He turned to the girl and knelt slowly, like approaching a wild colt. His voice dropped to something softer. "You're safe now, sweetheart." She blinked, unsure whether to run or collapse. Her lip trembled, but she didn't cry. She just held out the doll like it might protect her from everything. Mac reached for her. One of the buyers shouted, "I paid for her!" Another drew a pistol. Mac stood so fast it rattled the platform. "I said don't touch her!" His voice boomed like a war drum. A hush swept the yard. Even the horses stilled, the man with the pistol aimed. Too late. Mac's hand flashed across his belt. He drew his revolver and fired. One shot. The gunman's weapon flew from his grip. He screamed, clutching his broken hand. The silence that followed was absolute. Mac holstered his weapon, turned back to the child, and lifted her gently into his arms. She weighed nothing. He felt every one of her ribs under that torn blue dress. She smelled of sweat, dust, and fear. She buried her face in his chest. Murdoch snarled, "You've gone too far, Mac." That girl was property now. "You've just stolen her." Mac looked him dead in the eyes. "She's not property. She's a child." The sheriff's eyes flicked to his deputies. "Get him!" 3 men moved, Mac spun, leapt off the platform, and landed hard. His boots hit the dirt with a thunderous crack. The crowd parted as he strode toward the stockyard gate. Gunfire rang out. Mac ducked behind a wagon, shielding the girl with his body. Bullets tore through the wooden slats, splintering inches from her head. "Stop shooting, damn it!" Murdoch shouted. "You'll hit the product!" Mac cursed under his breath. Product. That's what they called her. He broke into a run, bursting from behind the wagon and cutting across the pen. One of the deputies rushed him, shotgun raised. Mac didn't stop. He dropped his shoulder and barreled into the man, sending him flying through a stack of crates. The gate was in sight. His horse, Dusty a weathered bay gelding, whinnied from where he'd been tied near the water trough. Mac leapt into the saddle in one fluid motion. The girl clutched tight against him. "Hold on," he whispered. She didn't speak, just nodded, her arms wrapping around his neck with a desperate strength. He kicked Dusty hard. The horse reared, then thundered down the dirt trail out of town. Behind them, chaos erupted. Murdoch's men mounted up. More gunfire cracked through the air. Mac urged the horse faster, weaving through cactus and dry creek beds, every jolt threatening to shake the girl loose. But she held on, her face buried against his chest, the doll crushed between them. After 15 minutes, the sounds of pursuit faded behind them. The town was a blur in the heat waves. Mac pulled Dusty into a hard stop behind a ridge of sandstone boulders. The horse snorted and stomped, flanks heaving. He dismounted, still holding the girl. Her eyes were wide, but no longer wild. She looked up at him. "You're safe now," he said again. It came out cracked and low. She didn't speak, just reached up and touched his beard like she was checking to see if he was real. He almost laughed. Instead, he knelt, set her gently on a flat rock, and crouched before her. "What's your name?" "Nothing." He pulled out his canteen, unscrewed the cap, and offered it. She flinched at first, then drank. Water spilled down her chin, and he handed her a dirty bandana to wipe her mouth. "I'm Mac," he said. Still silence, but her grip on the doll eased. She sat straighter. "Do you have a mama?" he asked softly. Her eyes welled up. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "You don't have to answer." He looked away, suddenly ashamed. He had no right asking. Not when he'd spent the last 20 years running from the same kind of pain. "I'll get you somewhere safe," he said finally. "Somewhere they'll never touch you again." The wind kicked up dust, swirling around them like a warning. The sun dipped lower behind the hills, stretching their shadows long and thin across the desert. Mac stood and scanned the horizon. Sheriff Murdoch would be coming, with men, with guns, and probably with worse. But Tobias McCallum had already lost one daughter. He wasn't about to lose another child. He turned to the girl. She was watching him closely now. Her lip trembled again, and for the first time her voice came in a whisper. "Juniper." "What?" "My name." Juniper Mac nodded. It suited her. "Well, Juniper," he said, lifting her back onto Dusty's saddle. "You stay close now. We've got a long ride ahead." As he climbed up behind her and urged the horse forward into the coming night, Juniper looked back once toward the town, the auction block, the platform where innocence had been bought and sold. Then she turned forward, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel alone. Far behind them, dust clouds rose again in the blood-red sunset. The hunters were coming. But this time, the prey had a giant cowboy on her side. The desert had a way of swallowing sound. In the high cliffs east of Bitter Creek, nothing stirred but the wind and the breath of a bay gelding cooling down from a hard ride. Tobias McCallum crouched near the mouth of a cave, his back pressed against sun-warmed rock, his hat pulled low, eyes scanning the horizon for dust trails. No riders yet. He turned to the child beside him. Juniper hadn't said a word since whispering her name hours ago. She sat with her knees tucked under her dress, doll in her lap, arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to disappear. Her skin was smudged with dirt, her lip cracked from dehydration, and her bare arms were marked with old bruises and one pink burn that wrapped around her wrist like a manacle. Mac noticed the burn again as the sunlight shifted. It was shaped in a perfect circle, too deliberate to be accidental. His jaw tightened. He'd seen brands like that before. On horses, on cattle, not on children. He walked to the edge of the cave and poured a trickle of water from his canteen into a tin cup. Then he crossed back to her and knelt. "Drink." She didn't move. "I ain't gonna hurt you, Juniper." Still nothing. He placed the cup on the rock between them and sat down, keeping his hands where she could see them. She reached for the cup with the caution of a coyote testing a trap. Her fingers trembled as she lifted it. She drank fast, water spilling down her chin. Mac pulled a faded bandana from his vest and handed it over. "You can keep that." She stared at it like it was gold, then slowly wiped her face. He watched her a moment longer, then leaned back, staring at the cave ceiling. The light bounced off the stone in dull, tired hues. He hadn't been here in years, not since the days when whiskey and grief had driven him to disappear for weeks at a time. Back then, he'd come here to forget. Now he was here to protect. His mind wandered, unbidden, to the past. Catherine's laughter. Emma's small, stubborn hands clutching that doll she named Sophie. The porch swing that creaked as dusk fell. Gone. All of it. 20 years ago, a wheel cracked loose on their wagon during a storm. The horse bolted, the wagon turned, and the world went black. When he woke, Catherine was dead, crushed under timber. And Emma, they told him she'd died instantly. Sheriff Murdoch himself brought him the closed coffin, said the body wasn't in a state to be seen. Mac never questioned it. Should have. He'd buried them both up on the hill overlooking the ranch. Then he buried himself in guilt, became a ghost in his own life. One drink at a time, one long silence after another. And now here was Juniper, wide blue eyes like Emma's. That doll crushed against her chest the way Emma used to hold hers. That unspoken pain, that haunted look that no child should wear. He hadn't saved his own daughter. But maybe he could save this one. He stood slowly and adjusted his vest. "I need to get help." Her head snapped up. "I'll come back," he said. "You'll be safe here." "This place, it's hidden. No one knows about it." She didn't speak, but her grip tightened around the doll's torn dress. He added, more gently, "I'm gonna bring someone who can look at that burn." Someone kind. He left his saddlebag and rifle beside her and tied the horse loosely just inside the cave mouth. She watched him every step, like a rabbit waiting to run. As he climbed the ridge above the cave, Mac paused and looked back. She was still sitting there, still silent, but not quite as afraid. He rode west. Bitter Creek shimmered like a mirage under the mid-afternoon sun. The closer he got, the more his chest ached with the weight of returning. He'd left that town behind years ago, knowing full well the poison that pulsed through its veins. But he also knew there were still a few good souls in it, or at least one. Doc Brennan's clinic sat near the Mexican Quarter, just off the main road. The building was narrow and sun-faded, with a crooked sign that read "Healer" above the door. Mac dismounted and stepped inside without knocking. The air smelled of carbolic acid and sage. Bottles lined the shelves and sunlight filtered through linen curtains. Elijah Brennan looked up from his desk, glasses perched on the edge of his nose. Late 60s, hair gone silver, hands still steady. His eyes locked on Mac, and for a moment, nothing was said. Then the old man stood. "Well, that's a ghost I never thought I'd see again." Don't have time to talk ghosts. I figured. You only come around when something's bleeding. Is it you this time? No, Max said, voice rough. It's a child. That stopped Brennan cold. He set down his pen. What kind of injury? Burn, bruises, silent, doesn't eat, won't speak much. She yours. Mac hesitated. No, but she's mine to protect now, Doc Brennan nodded slowly. Where is she? Hiding in the hills, near Red Rock Ridge. No one can see the entrance unless they know where to look. And who hurt her? You know damn well who. Brennan's eyes darkened. Murdoch. He was running an auction. In the stockyard, selling children. God Almighty. She was the youngest. 5, maybe. I couldn't let it happen. You didn't just steal a child, Mac. You declared war. I know. The doctor grabbed a satchel and began loading supplies. We'll need someone else. Mac frowned. Who? Elena's dead. I know. Then Maria. Mac flinched at the name. Maria Santos had lost 3 children in a single night years ago. Some said they'd run off, others whispered darker things. Mac had always believed the latter. He never spoke to her about it. Never had the courage. But he remembered her eyes. Eyes like burned coal, quiet, smoldering, full of unspent fire. Doc Brennan and Mac rode to the edge of town, down a dusty lane choked with mesquite and silence. The adobe house stood squat and weather-worn. The garden out front had gone to seed, but the door opened before they knocked. Maria stood there, braid down her back, apron dusted with flour. She looked from Mac to Brennan without blinking. What child? She asked. Mac opened his mouth but couldn't speak. She's hurt, Brennan answered. Burned, bruised, maybe worse. She's been through something terrible. Maria didn't ask more. She disappeared into the house, returned with a worn satchel, and closed the door behind her. They rode fast. The shadows stretched long across the ground by the time they reached the cave. Mac dismounted first, heart hammering as he stepped inside. Juniper was still there, and she wasn't alone. She had set up a line of tiny rocks in front of her doll, like a tea party. She looked up when he entered and, for the first time, didn't flinch. I told you I'd come back, he said quietly. She nodded. Maria stepped inside, followed by Brennan. Juniper stiffened. It's all right, Max said. This is Maria. She's a mother. She's lost more than most. And she knows how to help. Juniper watched her warily. Maria knelt. She didn't speak, just pulled out a small tin and unscrewed the lid, revealing a green salve. She held out her hand. Juniper hesitated, then slowly extended her arm. Max swallowed the lump in his throat. The girl trusted him, and maybe, just maybe, she would trust them too. Outside the cave, the last rays of sunlight spilled across the desert floor like molten gold. A hawk wheeled overhead, calling once before vanishing behind the ridgeline. Inside, Maria finished wrapping Juniper's wrist and handed her a piece of flatbread from her satchel. The child ate in small bites, eyes flicking between them. She's strong, Maria murmured, but this is just the beginning. Mac looked toward the firelight flickering on the walls. What do you mean? Maria didn't answer, but the way she looked at him said everything. Whatever evil had marked Juniper hadn't started with her. And it hadn't ended at that stockyard, not by a long shot. The road to the old silver mine was barely more than a scar carved through the hills, twisted, narrow, choked with sagebrush and the silence of long-buried sins. The mule Maria led carried their packs, its ears twitching at every gust of dry wind. Mac rode just ahead, glancing back every few minutes to check on Juniper. She walked beside Maria, her small boots scuffing against the gravel, face streaked with dust and determination. She hadn't said much since the night in the cave, but she hadn't let go of the doll, and now she held Mac's old bandana tucked under the strap of her dress like it meant something. Maria didn't explain where they were headed until they passed the last ridgeline and came upon the yawning black mouth of the mine. "This is where they kept them," she said simply. Mac pulled his horse to a stop. "I thought this place collapsed years ago," he muttered. "Part of it did," Maria said. "The rest stayed hidden. Sheriff Murdoch didn't want anyone poking around." Mac dismounted, the muscles in his shoulders knotting with something he couldn't name. Anger, maybe. Guilt. Grief that wasn't his, but sure felt like it. He walked toward the entrance and stopped short when he saw Juniper kneeling in the dirt. She wasn't afraid of the mine. She was staring at something half buried in the dust, a small wooden horse, whittled by hand, one leg broken, the rest faded from the sun. She picked it up gently, brushing dirt from its mane. Her lips parted. Mac crouched beside her. "You know that horse?" he asked softly. She shook her head but didn't let go of it. Maria came to stand behind them. "That toy belonged to my youngest, Mateo. He carved it himself. I found the twin to it in our house after he disappeared." Mac stared at the figure in Juniper's hands. "He was here," he said, barely able to get the words out. Maria nodded once. "They all were." She led them inside. The air was cooler in the mine, but the silence was heavy. The first chamber was wide and still bore the outlines of wooden support beams. Old lantern hooks hung like skeletons from the walls. At one end, a rusted iron cage door stood half open. Inside were scratch marks on the wall. Names. Tally marks. A child's drawing in charcoal. A girl. A dog. A house. Juniper stood at the edge of the cage, one hand pressed to the bars. Mac stepped past her and ran a gloved hand over the wall. He stopped when he reached a name carved with jagged strokes. Lila, age 6. He stared. "I remember her," Maria whispered. "Bright eyes. Used to sing to the doves. Her mama never stopped looking." "Why bring us here?" Mac asked. "Because people forget," Maria replied, "and because remembering is how we fight back." She turned and lit a lantern. Its flame cast flickering shadows on the walls. "Others are coming," she said. Mac blinked. "Others?" "I sent word." She nodded toward the mine entrance. Outside, in the fading light of dusk, a wagon approached, creaking, loaded with sacks and crates. A tall woman with gray streaks in her braids stepped down before the horses had stopped. "Ruth Calhoun," Maria said, "lost her son, Jesse, 8 years ago. Vanished after school. No one believed her." Mac stepped forward and met Ruth's eyes. They were clear and sharp as a hawk's. "You're the one who took that girl from the stockyard," she said without preamble. "I am." "Good." Ruth didn't offer more. She walked past him and laid a blanket near the mine's entrance. Juniper watched her warily but didn't retreat. A second rider came an hour later, Joseph Standing Bear, half Lakota, half Cheyenne, tall and silent, his horse sweat-soaked from hard riding. He removed his hat and said nothing at all, just touched the wall where the names were scratched and closed his eyes. "His niece," Maria whispered to Mac, "taken during a raid." He was blamed for her running off. Nearly lost his land. By nightfall, there were 5 families camped at the edge of the mine. They spoke little, but they shared food, and they brought names. Mac sat near the fire as the moon rose. Juniper curled beside him under his coat, her hand still gripping the wooden horse. He stared into the flames, listening to the murmured stories. Ruth spoke of Jesse's drawings, how he used to sketch maps of imaginary places. Joseph spoke of Lonnie, how she braided feathers into her brother's hair. A man named Tom Bradshaw spoke of his daughter, Ellie. She'd been mute, just like Juniper, but loved to dance in the rain. She was taken after church one Sunday. Sheriff Murdoch said she'd been tempted by the road. Each story was a thread. And slowly, in the shadows of the old mine, those threads began to braid together. Mac hadn't come looking for a fight. He hadn't come looking for purpose either. But now both had found him. He looked at Maria across the fire. What now? She met his gaze. Now we remember every child, and we find the ones still breathing. And the men who did this? She didn't answer with words, but her eyes burned with the promise of justice. Juniper stirred beside him, her voice barely a whisper. "Horse's name is Lucky," she said. Mac turned to her, stunned. "You remember him?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "Mateo gave it to me." Mac stared at her, and then he understood. She wasn't just a victim. She was a witness, and if she remembered enough, she could bring the whole thing down. The wind scraped across the ridge like it had bones to pick. Mac stood near the fire outside the mine, sharpening a blade by habit, but his thoughts weren't on the steel. They were on the girl sleeping beside the mule cart, her hand clutched around a faded cloth doll missing one eye and most of its stuffing. Juniper had been silent again since whispering the horse's name, silent but watchful. The way she looked at the others, Ruth, Joseph, Tom, like she was trying to decide if they were safe. Like part of her wanted to disappear, and part of her wanted to stay close to Mac. He couldn't blame her. He still hadn't figured out which part of him wanted what. Maria came from the mine, wiping her hands on her apron. "We'll start building proper shelter soon. I found some planks in the lower tunnels, enough to raise a roof or two." Mac nodded. "She's holding something back," Maria said quietly, glancing toward Juniper. "She's earned the right," he replied, "but secrets this deep, they fester." Juniper stirred. Her fingers twitched, and then, without a word, she sat up, walked to the fire, and sat cross-legged across from Mac. Her doll was in her lap. She looked at it for a moment, then at Mac. "I need you to promise," she said. He set the blade down. "Promise what?" "That you won't tell anyone yet. Not even Maria." "All right." She took a breath. Then, with slow, trembling hands, she turned the doll over, pulled at a seam along the side, and reached inside. From the lining, she drew out a folded square of paper, stained at the edges, the ink smudged but still legible. She held it out to him. He didn't reach for it. "You sure?" he asked. She nodded. Mac took the paper and unfolded it. Names, dozens of them, each with an age, a town, a date, some marked with check marks, others with crosses. Then he saw it. Emma Rose Hartwell, age 6, Bitter Creek. His throat closed. "No," he whispered. Juniper was watching him. "I found that in a house with bars on the windows. There were kids there. We were told to never speak their names." His hand trembled, Emma. "His daughter, gone 20 years, killed in a wagon crash. At least that's what the sheriff told him. A fire. No survivors, only burned remains. But this, are you sure it was her name?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Juniper nodded slowly. There was a picture on the wall. Her name was under it. She had the same eyes as you. He blinked hard. The fire crackled between them. Maria approached, sensing something had shifted. "What is it?" she asked gently. Max said nothing, just handed her the paper. She read it in silence, jaw tight. This is ledger quality," she murmured. "They kept records like it was business." "It was," Mac growled. "A system." Maria's finger stopped over another name. Tom's daughter, Ruth's son, Joseph's niece. They're all here. Some are marked dead, Mac said, but some aren't. Maria lowered the paper. Then some may still be alive. Ruth joined them now, followed by Joseph. One look at their faces, and it was clear they'd seen enough pain to understand what Mac was holding. He handed it to them wordlessly. Ruth stared at the names, her lips barely moving as she read. Jesse, age 9, last seen 3 years after he vanished. Her knees buckled, but Joseph caught her. Maria turned to Mac. There's only one place records like this would be copied and stored, she said. If this was meant as a field list, then someone kept the master at the source. Judge Finch, Mac said. Maria nodded. Every land transfer, every adoption order, every orphan auction. He signed off on them all. Mac stood, his jaw clenched. Then we ride for his estate. Joseph looked up sharply. That's a fortress. Ruth wiped her eyes, guarded, wired. He's paranoid. He should be, Mac muttered. Juniper was silent again, but she placed the doll in Mac's lap before curling up beside the fire. He held the doll for a long time. The stitch she'd torn open wasn't new. It had been resewn, many times. That meant someone taught her to hide things, someone who knew secrets could save you. He looked back at the list, now spread across a saddlebag. I need to know if Emma was really taken, he said, more to himself than anyone else. If she's alive, if they faked her death. Maria's eyes narrowed. Then that means Judge Finch isn't just a partner in this. No, Mac replied. He's the one pulling the strings. Joseph spoke for the first time. Then we go to war. Mac looked around the fire, faces weathered by grief, worn by time, but alive and burning with something dangerous. Hope. We'll go in quiet, Mac said. Take what we need. Nothing more. And if they catch us? Ruth asked. Mac looked toward the horizon where the Finch estate loomed like a shadow against the coming dawn. Then we burn it all to the ground. But deep inside, he wasn't just thinking of documents or stolen names. He was thinking of his daughter, and the terrible possibility that she might still be out there, alive, and not know she had a father who never stopped mourning her. The storm rolled in fast that night, sheets of rain smearing the moonlight, thunder snapping across the mesa like a cracked whip. The desert always kept its secrets, but tonight, one of them was finally about to spill. Elena Vasquez stood barefoot on the stone floor of the Finch estate's upper hall, her dark hair soaked from the downpour, her hands trembling as she slid the false drawer from the judge's mahogany desk. She didn't have long. Finch's hunting dogs were restless, and if the guard on the south wing turned early, her fingers closed around a bundle of leather-bound folios. She pressed them to her chest and slipped into the shadows without a sound. By dawn, she was at the mine. Maria met her at the edge of the ridge, helped her dismount, and pulled her into an embrace. I was careful, Elena whispered. They won't know they're missing. Not yet. Mac was waiting by the fire, staring into the flames as if they owed him something. When Maria handed him the bundle, he didn't speak, just took it and sat down under the overhang, where the cave kept the wind off his shoulders. He opened the first folio slowly. There were adoption orders, forged medical reports, death certificates. One name kept repeating. Emma Rose Hartwell. One line in particular stopped him cold. Deceased burned beyond identification. No remains recovered. Case closed by order of Judge Alton Finch. But right underneath was a sealed annex. Emma Rose Hartwell, relocated under special guardianship to the Kensington estate, patient classified under behavioral instability. Name changed upon arrival. He flipped to the next page. New identity, Eleanor Kensington, ward of Clarice Kensington. Status, private care, pregnant at 14, infant girl placed under Kensington Trust. Mac's vision blurred. Emma, his daughter. She hadn't died. She'd been stolen. Her death had been staged, her name erased, her childhood replaced with imprisonment. And then, childbirth. His breath caught in his throat. Juniper! Juniper was her daughter, his granddaughter. He stood up so fast the bench behind him clattered against the wall. The others gathered quickly, drawn by the noise. Joseph, Ruth, Tom, Maria. Elena stood nearby, clutching her shawl tight, rain still dripping from her skirt. Mac handed the document to Maria without a word. She read in silence, her eyes wide. "This changes everything," she whispered. "The girl, Juniper, she's your blood." Mac looked at Juniper, who was crouched by the fire with Scout the dog curled beside her. She was watching them all, eyes alert but unreadable. "She doesn't know," Mac said softly. "None of this." Ruth's voice cracked. "They've been doing this for years. Faking deaths, selling children, turning orphans into livestock." Joseph's face was ashen. "And hiding behind God and law while doing it." Maria turned to Elena. "How did you get this?" "Finch kept everything, locked in that drawer like trophies. He always said a clean ledger was more powerful than a gun." Mac's hands balled into fists. "Then it's time to turn that ledger into dynamite." They gathered in the main chamber of the mine, now rigged with lanterns, maps spread across crates and barrels. The fire had gone from comfort to war drum. Mac paced in front of them, a man no longer hollowed by grief but hardened by it. "We know where they're planning the next sale," he said. "The old mission church outside Dry Hollow. Midnight. End of the week, they'll have guards," Tom said, "and buyers." "Let them," Mac replied. "We'll have truth." "And fire," Maria pointed at the map. "There's a back entrance through the cellar ruins." "My cousin used to hide there when he skipped Sunday sermons," Ruth added. "I can bring smoke bombs." "Tanner, I know, keeps them in his barn, says they scare off cougars." Joseph nodded. "I've got 5 men who lost children, all willing to fight, all with nothing left to lose." Juniper stepped forward quietly, holding her doll again. "They wear masks when they come, asas," she said. "But one of them always smells like peppermint. He gave me candy once. Said I was special. Said he paid extra." Mac's jaw clenched. "They'll all pay," he said, "but we don't go in guns blazing. We gather evidence. We bring witnesses. We show the world." "And then?" Maria asked. "Then we end them." The fire crackled. The wind outside howled like it knew what was coming. Elena spoke last. "You need to see one more thing." From Finch's safe she handed Mac a photograph, yellowed at the edges. A teenage girl, maybe 16. Long dark hair, sunken eyes, a bruised smile, holding a baby wrapped in blue flannel. On the back, scrawled in ink, "Eleanor and Juniper, 1892. He traced the name with his thumb. Emma. She'd lived. She'd suffered. And somewhere along the way she died all over again. But her daughter was still here, breathing, watching, waiting. Mac looked to the others. "We don't go in there for vengeance. We go for justice." "And if justice won't come," Ruth asked, "then we drag it in by the throat." They nodded one by one. The storm passed by mourning, but none of them slept, because the next time they stepped into town, it would be to burn down the lie that had haunted Bitter Creek for a generation. And as Mac sat in the dark, the photograph in one hand and the doll in the other, he whispered to the girl across the cave. "Your mama was my little girl once, and I swear to God, they'll never touch you the way they touched her." The desert morning began like any other. Dry wind brushing through creosote, the rising sun bleeding across the hills. But down in the hollow where the old silver mine lay hidden, The air was heavy with something else. Dread. Maria was first to sense it. She had a way of listening to silence, of knowing when the birds had gone quiet for a reason. She stepped outside the cave's entrance with her rifle slung low and her eyes scanning the ridgeline. Something flickered against the morning light. A glint, a shadow moving just out of place. She turned on her heel and shouted, "Down! Get to cover!" The first shot cracked across the canyon, splitting the air like thunder. It punched into the rock wall just inches from Mac's head as he dove to the ground, pulling Juniper with him. Then came the flood. Gunfire rained down from the ridge, echoing off the stone like 100 hammers against anvils. Dust flew, horses reared, screams tore through the air. Murdoch had found them, no one knew how. Maybe a loose tongue in town, maybe one of Finch's men following Elena. It didn't matter now. Murdoch wasn't here to talk, he was here to kill. His men came hard and fast, rifles in hand, boots sliding down the loose shale of the slope like wolves descending on a cornered deer. Mac rolled behind a crate of ore samples and fired back, taking one of them clean through the shoulder. Joseph Standing Bear was already up the opposite ledge, his bow in hand, arrows flying with terrifying accuracy. Tom Bradshaw slammed home shells into his shotgun, barking curses with every blast. "Don't let them box us in. Cover the south wall. They're flanking." The mine had become a fortress and a coffin. Ruth grabbed Juniper and pulled her behind an overturned wagon, shielding the girl with her body. The child clutched the wooden horse tighter than ever, her eyes wide, her lips trembling but silent. Inside the cave, Elena and Maria worked to move the women and injured further back, using the old tunnels as escape routes. Smoke and dust choked the air. And then came Murdoch himself. He strolled into the canyon floor like he owned the world, coat flapping, rifle across his chest, a cruel smile playing on his face. His eyes locked on Mac. "You should have stayed buried, Hartwell." Mac stepped from behind cover slowly, dust and blood smearing his face, gun still steady in his hand. "You're gonna answer for what you did to my daughter." Murdoch chuckled. "Which one? The one you lost, or the one you're about to watch me take?" Before Mac could answer, a shot rang out, not from Murdoch's men, but from the rocks above. Murdoch's hat flew off his head as a bullet tore past his ear. He staggered back, stunned, and chaos erupted again. Maria had circled around the ridge, taken the high ground. From that moment, everything changed. Mac's people surged forward with fury in their veins. Ruth dropped one of Murdoch's men with a clean shot to the chest. Tom's shotgun cracked like judgment. Joseph moved like smoke, never where they expected him. When the dust finally settled, the silence came slow and shaking. Bodies lay scattered across the canyon floor, some of theirs. More of Murdoch's. Blood pooled in the dust, turning it a rusted red. Tom Bradshaw was down, gut-shot and gasping. His wife knelt over him, sobbing. Joseph's brother hadn't made it, his bow still clenched in his hand, 2 fingers blown off. Juniper hadn't spoken a word since the first shot. She just sat beside Scout, rocking slightly, the doll still clutched to her chest. But in the wreckage, something new emerged. While searching Murdoch's saddlebag, Maria pulled out a leather scroll, worn but intact. She unrolled it, eyes scanning the faded ink. It was a map. Not just of the mine, of the whole trafficking route from the holding cells outside Ridge Pass to the buyer's estates near Fort Constance. Arrows marked trails, dates, drop-off points. And at the center, a red circle over the old mission church outside Bitter Creek. Their next destination, their stronghold, their reckoning. Mac took the map in hand and stared at it like it was a blueprint for revenge. "They think we're still running," he said. Joseph wiped blood from his brow. "We're done hiding," Maria nodded. "We finish this." "For Tom, for Joseph's brother, for Emma," Ruth whispered, "and for the ones still waiting in cages." That night they buried their dead with dignity and firelight, wrapped in quilts and prayers. No names were forgotten, no blood spilled without cause, but the grieving gave way to resolve. For the first time, Max saw it, not just in his people's eyes, but in the way they stood taller, firmer, unafraid. What began as a scattered band of broken hearts had become something more, a resistance. And as the stars emerged above the silver hills, Juniper finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, but every ear heard it. "Let's go get them back." They set out under the cloak of moonlight. No fire, no noise, just breath and hoofbeats and the weight of what had to be done. Max stood at the edge of the ridge, peering down into the valley where the old stone church sat like a tomb carved from ash. The steeple had crumbled years ago, and the surrounding cemetery was overgrown with dry weeds and sagging wooden crosses. But tonight, the place pulsed with new life, the wrong kind. Lanterns burned in every window. Smoke rose from the back kitchen. Horse-drawn carriages lined the fence line, gleaming with brass and velvet. Inside those carriages sat men and women with coins in their pockets and rot in their souls. New Orleans bankers, New York politicians, foreign brokers with tailored coats and dead eyes. They weren't here to worship. They were here to buy. The group crouched around a patch of moonlit brush, the map spread out on a flat rock. "3 entrances," Maria whispered. "Front, back, and cellar." "Elena," Max said, glancing at her, "you sure you want to go in first?" She nodded. Her hair was tied in a tight bun beneath a lace servant's cap. Her dress was plain, her eyes hard. "I worked in homes like theirs," she said. "They don't see women like me. I'm invisible to them." "That's our advantage." Father Miguel unwrapped a small cloth bundle. Inside were sticks of dynamite wrapped in waxed paper and tied with cotton fuses. "This," he said softly, "is our insurance. If things go wrong, we bring the roof down." Mac's jaw tensed. "Only if the children are safe." "We're not lighting that fuse unless we have no other way." Juniper sat nearby, arms crossed over her chest, her face pinched with defiance. She had stayed quiet most of the ride, but now she spoke. "I'm going in too." Mac blinked. "No, absolutely not. You'll need someone they're not afraid of," she said. "Someone the children trust. If I walk in with Elena, the girls won't run. They'll see me and know they're not alone." "Juniper," Ruth began, her voice gentle, "this isn't a game." "I know," she said, "but they're scared, right? Like I was. And scared kids don't move unless someone shows them how." The group exchanged glances. No one spoke for a long moment. Then Elena reached out and squeezed the girl's hand. "You stay close to me," she said. Juniper nodded. Mac looked like he wanted to argue again, but the words didn't come. He just crouched and looked the girl in the eye. "You do exactly what Elena says. The second something feels wrong, you find a way out. You hear me?" "I do," she whispered. As the others dispersed, taking positions along the perimeter, Mac and Joseph circled to the west side, where an old storm drain led under the chapel. Maria and Ruth remained in the rear tree line, rifles trained on the windows. Inside the church, the world changed. It was no longer sacred ground. It was a theater of cruelty. The pews had been removed and replaced with long tables covered in velvet cloth and silver trays of wine and smoked meat. Candles flickered against stone walls. The altar had been turned into a stage. A man in a plum-colored coat stood behind it, reading off a list of assets as if they were livestock. "Elise, age 9, virgin. Speaks English and French." Juniper gripped Elena's hand tighter. They passed down the hallway, heads bowed, pretending to carry linens. Then, in a quiet side corridor near the vestry, a sound stopped them both. Whispers. Children. Elena turned and pushed open a door just a crack. Inside were two girls huddled beneath a bench, their faces hollow, cheeks streaked with tears. When they saw Juniper, they froze. Juniper stepped inside slowly. "It's okay," she whispered. "We came to help." "We're getting you out." The girls didn't move. One of them clutched a doll, much like the one Juniper had carried weeks before. Then a soft voice came from the other corner of the room. "She's telling the truth." Elena and Juniper turned. A woman stepped into the dim light. Her dress was worn, her hair tangled, but her posture was proud back straight, chin lifted. She was in her early 30s, maybe younger if not for the lines carved by suffering. Mac's heart would have stopped if he had seen her. It was Emma. Her voice was low but steady. "I've kept them safe as long as I could. But they're moving the children tonight after the auction. The youngest are being sent south to ships waiting past the river." Elena gasped. "You're Emma," she nodded once. "I was Emma Hartwell. Now, I don't even know who I am." Juniper's lip trembled. "You're my mama." Emma froze. Her breath caught. Her legs gave out beneath her, and she dropped to her knees. Juniper stepped forward and wrapped her arms around the woman. Emma trembled as she held her daughter for the first time. Outside the room, voices rose. The bidding had begun. Elena shut the door gently and leaned against it, her chest heaving. "We have to move." Now Emma stood, still holding Juniper. Her voice was hoarse. "They're in the basement." 30 more children. Locked in cages, Elena stared at her. "We need keys." Emma shook her head. "No time. We need a fire." "Outside." Thunder rumbled, not from the sky, but from the earth. Father Miguel had placed his fuses. The clock was ticking. And Mac? He was already beneath the floorboards, listening, watching, waiting for the signal to bring the whole damn place crashing down. The night cracked open with the sound of thunder that came from beneath the earth. Not lightning, not rain. This storm was man-made. Father Miguel had lit the fuses. A deep, rolling boom shook the valley as the old stone cellar exploded in a burst of flame and dust, sending timber, rock, and iron upward like shrapnel from hell. Screams tore through the air as the floor of the chapel buckled and a corner of the roof collapsed, spilling firelight and chaos into the once holy place. Mac burst from the shadows, rifle raised, eyes sharp. His boots hit the floorboards just as the guards turned, weapons drawn. He didn't hesitate. One shot to the chest, another to the thigh. The bastards dropped like sacks of grain. "Move! Move!" he shouted into the smoke, waving Ruth and Joseph forward from the side entrances. Tom covered the rear, laying down fire toward the fleeing carriages, dropping 2 of Murdoch's buyers before they reached the gates. The once silent countryside erupted into a war zone. Inside the chapel, chandeliers swung wildly, glass crashing onto the stone. Children screamed from the corners, cowering behind broken pews. Mac leapt over the altar rail, heart pounding, scanning for her. Then he saw them. Near the far end, beneath the remnants of a stained glass window, Murdoch stood with his pistol pressed against Emma's head. She was on her knees, hands bound, blood trailing from her temple. Her eyes locked on Mac's, wide but steady. Murdoch grinned, teeth yellow, breath ragged. His fine coat was torn and his boots dusted with ash. "I was wondering when you'd show up, Mac Hartwell," he snarled. "I was starting to think you forgot your little ghost." "Let her go," Mac said, stepping forward, slow, steady, rifle trained. Murdoch's thumb cocked the hammer. "She's mine now. Bought and paid for. She's the backbone of this whole operation. These children listen to her. Obey her. She's the currency. You never owned her, Mac growled. You never broke her. She's stronger than you ever were, Murdoch laughed, short and ugly. You don't get it. You blow up a few walls and think you've won. There's 10 more operations like this. 100 more, girls. This doesn't end because you want it to. From the shadows behind the altar, Juniper appeared. She had slipped in through the back as the chaos unfolded. Her dress was torn, her face smudged with soot, but her eyes blazed with something ancient and fierce. "Mama!" she screamed, running forward. Murdoch turned just enough. Emma moved. With a sudden jerk, she threw her weight backward, slamming her head into his nose. He cursed, stumbling, his grip faltering. That was all Mac needed. One shot. It echoed like Judgment Day inside those crumbling walls. Murdoch collapsed, gun tumbling from his hand, dead before he hit the floor. Emma dropped beside him, gasping. Juniper reached her first, wrapping her arms around her mother, sobbing into her neck. Emma held her tight, rocking slowly, whispering, "It's over." It's over, but it wasn't. The fire had spread. Flames climbed the beams above. Cries still echoed from the cellar below. Ruth and Joseph were guiding children out the side doors, one by one. Elena dragged an unconscious girl from the vestry. Father Miguel stumbled out of the smoke, coughing, blood staining his sleeve. Mac knelt beside Emma. "We've got to move." "Now." She nodded, but her eyes never left Juniper. "Go," she whispered. "Take her." "I'll follow." Mac didn't argue. He lifted Juniper in his arms and ran. The chapel groaned behind them as they emerged into the night air. Horses scattered, lanterns toppled, and the crowd of buyers either lay dead or fled into the hills, their empire of cruelty crumbling around them. But Emma, she hadn't come out yet. Mac turned back, frozen. Then he saw her, standing tall in the doorway, hair whipping in the wind, holding the keys in one hand and a crying child in the other. And behind her, rising through the smoke, a figure emerged from the crypts below. A child no older than 7. Then another. Then 20 more. Emma didn't run. She led them out, one step at a time, like a shepherd through fire. Dawn broke slowly, its light spilling like mercy over a valley scarred by fire and truth. Smoke still curled from the remains of the chapel, now a husk of charred wood and ash. But amid the wreckage, life moved forward, shaky, blinking, clutching one another like shipwrecked sailors crawling ashore. The children emerged one by one from the tunnels beneath the church. Their faces were pale, gaunt, and streaked with soot, but their eyes, though tired, held something new. Hope. A kind of fragile, defiant light that hadn't been there before. Villagers stood in stunned silence, some with hands over their mouths, others kneeling in the dirt as tears fell freely. Ruth dropped to her knees, arms wide open, as a boy she hadn't seen in 3 years stumbled into her embrace. Joseph helped carry a mute girl, no older than 6, wrapped in his coat, her tiny hands gripping his sleeve as though it were a lifeline. People cried. Hard men. Women with salt in their voices. Folks who'd looked the other way for too long now found themselves watching these children rise like ghosts returning from the grave. Elena, bloodied and bruised, helped Father Miguel to his feet. They stood shoulder to shoulder, faces turned to the light as dozens of survivors walked past them into the open air. Then came Emma. She walked slowly, her dress scorched at the hem, hair singed at the edges, but she carried herself like a storm that had passed through fire and come out clean. At her side walked Juniper, her hand never leaving Emma's. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. When they reached the top of the hill, Juniper stopped, turned, and flung her arms around Emma's waist. "Mama," she whispered, voice breaking. "You came back." Emma's breath caught. her arms wrapped tightly around her daughter, her chin resting atop Juniper's dusty curls. "I never left," she whispered. "I just had to find the way out." Mac stood a few steps away, eyes glassy. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched the two people he had failed once, now whole again. Elena nudged him gently. "Go to them." He hesitated, then took a slow step forward, then another. Emma looked up. Their eyes met, and for a moment, all the noise, crying, coughing, the clatter of boots on loose stone faded into nothing. He opened his arms. Emma didn't run. She walked straight into them. Juniper followed, pressing herself between them like she belonged there all along. They held each other for a long, trembling moment. And when Mac finally exhaled, it was as if a lifetime of guilt and rot drained out of his bones. Behind them, Tom emerged carrying a bundle wrapped in oilskin. He handed it to Joseph, who peeled it back and revealed stacks of papers, ledgers, names, payments, coded symbols marking shipments of children and girls like inventory, the documents that would undo an empire. "These go straight to the telegraph station," Tom said. "We're sending copies to every federal marshal from here to St. Louis." Joseph nodded grimly. "And the newspapers, too." By midday, riders had already left town in 4 directions. That night, lanterns burned in courthouse windows across the territory. Names were whispered, bribes exposed. Judges, mayors, and even marshals found themselves listed in the ledgers. No more hiding, no more pretending. The sun that set that evening looked different somehow. It poured gold onto the hills like a benediction, like something sacred had happened beneath its gaze. As the last light faded, Mac sat with Juniper in his lap, her head resting against his chest. Emma leaned beside him, one hand resting on his knee. They were quiet, just watching the horizon. His coat was wrapped around them all like a shield. "I used to think I wasn't meant for anything good," Mac murmured, "that I was just the man who messed it all up." "You're the one who put it back together," Emma said gently. Juniper lifted her head. "You saved us, Uncle Mac." He chuckled low in his chest. "Guess I'm not a useless old drunk after all." She poked his ribs. "You were never that. You just forgot how big your heart was." Behind them, the town was stirring to life again. People were rebuilding, sweeping ash from their porches, opening their doors wider than they ever had before. For once, nobody seemed afraid to say the truth out loud. And just as the last rays dipped below the mountains, a new shadow approached from the trail. A lone rider, a federal badge glinted on his chest. And strapped to his saddle were more ledgers, not from this town, but from the next. 6 months had passed since the smoke cleared, and the cries of children rose not in fear, but in play. The land where Mac's old ranch once stood had changed. The blackened ruins were gone, replaced by wide porches, fresh timber, and new fences. Where silence had once ruled, laughter now echoed. The soil had not forgotten what it had seen, but neither had it rejected what it had become. Mac's ranch had turned into something greater than it had ever been. Not just a home, a sanctuary. 27 children lived there now, each with a story no child should carry. Some spoke little. Others clung tight to old dolls or worn boots, memories from darker places. But each morning they rose to the smell of fresh cornbread and the sound of roosters crowing. They learned how to mend fences, groom ponies, swing hammers, and spell their names with chalk on the new schoolhouse wall. The ranch didn't run on cattle anymore. It ran on second chances. Maria ran the kitchen like a ship captain. She barked at muddy boots but always had a warm biscuit in hand for anyone who needed one. Brennan had built the schoolhouse from pine and sweat, painting it himself with juniper, and 2 boys perched on ladders like wild monkeys. Emma. Emma had become the heart of it all. She moved through the house with ease now, no longer looking over her shoulder. Her hands were calloused, her hair longer. When a child woke screaming at night, it was her voice that soothed them. When someone scraped a knee or broke a toy, it was her lap they climbed into. Juniper still clung to her like ivy, though she ran wilder now, leading races across the corral and organizing grand missions with the younger kids. One bright afternoon, while helping Mac dig fence posts near the back lot, Juniper disappeared into the old barn. It was the last building left untouched, since the fire, its charred beams still standing like skeleton ribs. He called out for her, but before he could walk halfway there, she came running back, cradling something small and dusty. "Mama," she shouted, breathless, "look what I found." Emma turned, wiping her hands on her apron. "What is it, baby?" Juniper unwrapped a scorched cloth and held it out. Inside lay a small wooden horse, its paint mostly gone, its tail chipped but its body still whole. Emma stared. She knelt and reached for it like it might vanish if she moved too quickly. Where did you find this?" "Behind the old feed barrels," Juniper said. "Was it yours?" Emma smiled softly, tears slipping down her cheek. "My papa carved it when I was 7. I used to ride it around the barn, dreaming I was galloping away somewhere far." She ran her fingers along the grain of the wood, then looked up at Mac. He hadn't spoken yet, just stood with his hat in hand, watching the two of them like he'd never seen anything so holy. "It came back to you," Juniper whispered. Emma hugged her. "So did you." That night, after supper and stories, the sky flared with stars, the kind of stars that only show themselves in places scrubbed clean of noise and pain. Children snored in rows under the rafters. Maria hummed a lullaby while folding blankets. And out on the porch, Mac sat in his old rocking chair, the wood creaking with each sway. Emma leaned against the post beside him. Juniper dozed in his lap, warm and heavy. She stirred slightly, blinked at the horizon glowing faint orange with the dying sun, and mumbled, "Papa, Mac, are we going home?" Mac looked out over the land, once broken, now blooming, and said, his voice thick with emotion, "Yes, sweetheart, we're already home." The wind carried that word home through the trees, across the yard, into the hearts of those who had waited too long to believe in such a thing. Justice hadn't fixed everything, but it had opened a door, and from somewhere far away, telegrams and letters kept arriving, people asking how they could help, where they could send blankets, what to do with the names in those ledgers. Because this wasn't just one town's story anymore. It was a reckoning, and it had only just begun. If you were moved by this story, by the courage of one broken man, one fierce girl, and a mother who never stopped fighting, then stay with us. More stories from the Western legacy are coming. Stories of grit, of justice, of love rising out of dust. Subscribe to Western Legacy today and join us as we shine light into every dark corner of the Old West, one soul at a time.